Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin here with the rock and roll air drummer, air guitarist, air bassist, air flute, air lead electric triangle, Teos. How's it going?
How am I supposed to even speak after all that noise? That was
No,
great.
that's the episode for today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you,
We'll see
everybody.
everybody next week.
Good night. Drive home safely. Yeah, we
I
are
kind of
filmed.
wish.
We are filmed before a live studio audience. I don't know. A lot of people don't know that.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, it's my cat, but it's alive right now.
it's the trees outside for me. So yeah.
Okay, that's good. So let's get right into it. Let's go to our Tweetbag, Tootbag, Patreon missive, and we have a lineup today, a lineup of messages and questions to get to. First, we're going to start with Dr. Nick via Patreon. He says, my mind has been coming back to the discussion from episode 120 and 121 about dropping to 0 hit points and Shawn's ongoing comments about D&D being a game about hit point management. Would the two of you mind discussing healing in the context of hit point management? It seems to me that some of the problems that have been discussed over the last 2 weeks might be attributed to the fact that healing is just too weak. Mathematically, healing is almost always worse than dealing damage. That said, powerful healing also increases the social pressure on the healer to heal and limits player options. Thoughts? This is a really, really good point.
This is
Really
an
good point.
astute question.
And yeah, and so I'm going to answer it very mathematically. So if we could turn D&D into a mathematical equation, for me, it's super simplified, and I'm horrible at math, and I apologize to anybody who's like had math over the 9th grade level who is better at me than math. But on one end, you have PC hit points and plus the damage that PCs can do. And that the game wants that to be greater than the monster hit points and the damage a monster can do. And so it's those two things. It's the hit points the characters have plus the damage that they can do. So healing may seem mathematically worse than dealing damage, but the damage you can do is multiplied by the number of characters that are able to do that.
Yeah.
So up until a character is down, then yes, it's probably better to do damage to the monster on your turn. But once that character goes down, the amount of damage that your party can do is cut. If you have 6 characters, it's cut by a sixth when you lose the character. So healing that character, even 1 hit point, adds a sixth more, right, to the damage that you can do to the monsters.
Yeah.
So I would say that healing is not overpowered in the game in general, just because more DMs I talk to have trouble challenging the party than have trouble keeping the party alive.
Right.
But that sort of plays into the equation. Did you have any thoughts on that, Teos?
I do. And I agree completely with what you're saying, and it's also the feel of what healing and hit point loss should work like. If this were a game like Shadowrun and some others where you had a track, and as you take wounds, you were to be at penalties to attack or something like that, right? Which may be more realistic. I'm hurt. I'm less able to do things. Then giving just a little bit of healing can have an impact. And it matters where you are on that track, right? But as we've said before, D&D has really hung its hat on it doesn't matter whether I have 1 hit point or 120, I am effective. And that's a game that's trying to do heroic play. And that's awesome, right? That's where we are with this game. And in that kind of a game, then it's even less reduced to do a big heal versus a moderate heal or a small heal, right? You can imagine if you had those choices on your spell list, it almost doesn't matter which you use, because as long as you stay above 1, you're okay. And then once you get to that equation, you get to what you're talking about, which is, well, then why even bother healing, right? And even if the game gave you a really powerful heal, like the heal spell, when do you use that? You really only use the heal spell when you expect that your you're going to take so much more damage next round that I need to not only get you back up, but allow you to have another round to function, right? Or another couple of rounds before I get back to healing you. And that's why heal is used, right? That's very different than, say, some video games where when you're playing, like, say, PvP style things, the bars are going up and down wildly, right? Like the healer's constantly healing because you have to keep a healer sort of rewarded and feeling good about that, right? So it's just constant up and downs. And third edition did a little bit of that, but even then, it was a fairly arguably weak impact on the game. And I think that's just not the fun play that we're looking for, where you're constantly topping off, constantly doing that. And if I can go boldly one more step, it's why we complain about temporary hit points on this show, because temporary hit points sort of break the logic of what everything we've been talking about, that underpinning of where you are, by creating these additional levels of hit points, often recurring with things like a Twilight Cleric, that just further prevent any need for healing at all. In fact, even you're not going to go to 0 anyway, so there isn't even a need to heal whatsoever, because these temporary hit points are just an endless cushion, right?
Yeah. And the game since 3rd, 4th edition has helped with that, limiting player options for clerics or healers by giving things like bonus action heals, where the character can do the healing job to make the other players happy, and then still do a thing to feel good about their contribution to the removal of hit points or addition of conditions to the enemies. And we'll get into conditions later and talk about where that fits into this
But that's
this
a neat
equation.
angle. That one of the things that 4th edition really did was to say you're not just a healer, you're a leader. And that it's not just the healing, but it's the buffing, it's the movement, the tactical position, all those aspects started being part of the definition of what a healer leader was, which then gave you a greater role, because you were doing things to help all the time, but they were these other things beyond healing. And a lot of times it'd be like, I heal you and you can take a move action, right? And that was super fun.
Right. Right. Or if you hit with your attack, you can also heal an adjacent ally for X points of X points of damage. And so there was a recognition by the designers by that point that, being just the healer and spending every action that you had on your turn just healing was valuable and necessary, but wasn't necessarily fun.
Yeah.
All right, next we have Tatum Vey via Mastodon. Dear Mastering Dungeons, first off, your information and inspiration has made me a better GM, DM, keeper to game groups. We owe you a debt of gratitude for helping me be our designated okay enough forever GM. Well, thank you, Tatum. I'm glad we could help. And thank you for keeping this hobby that we love going. My question is, with the news emotions of the OGL 1.1, what is the general discourse missing? As creators, fans, staples of the industry, what are some of the secondary or tertiary effects or subjects the general conversation isn't focused on that you can bring to light? That is an amazing question. That is a tough question. Should we wait until we talk about the OGL to discuss this, Teos?
No, I think I like this question.
You want to get into it right now?
Yeah.
We're going to talk about the OGL later, get into the details of it. But so for me, now I'm going to take off my Ghostfire Gaming hat. I am no longer an employee of Ghostfire Gaming for what I'm about to say. Here are my sort of tertiary thoughts. I'll start with, we love this game as a hobby, as something we do for fun, as maybe even a lifestyle, right? A culture. We revolve our schedules around our game, and we go out of our way and we spend our discretionary income to buy these things, and we wear the shirts and we watch the shows and we do these things. But there is a business behind it. And as awful as business can be sometimes, Teos and I can talk all about that from not just gaming side of things, but from the life side of things. It does affect this game positively and negatively. And to quote Battlestar Galactica, right, all of this has happened before and all of this will happen again. From first edition to second edition, people were raging about why are they doing this huge money grab, this new edition that we don't want and we don't need. The rage was there. There was no internet then, so the rage was self-contained, except for letters to magazines or discussions with your friends. That was it. We could go second edition, third edition. In organized play, Teos and I have both been in positions where we have been middle management, where things happened above us and we had no say in it, or our say wasn't listened to. And sometimes it was. Sometimes it was listened to, and sometimes we did get to make those choices, but a lot of times we didn't. And we had to then report on these changes that we knew everyone would hate to the player base or to people in the organization, on below us, not below us in terms of how good they were as people, but below us in terms of just the chain of command. And we had to sit there and take it. We had to take the abuse for things that we didn't choose, but we couldn't talk about for business reasons, for confidentiality reasons, for whatever, or sometimes we didn't even know the reasons why. We weren't told, we just had to do it. So there's all of this stuff happening in this chain, and there are so many people in this chain, and it's all happened before, and it's all going to happen again. I also want to remind people that the news is not the truth. I'm not saying that people are making things up when they report. I'm not saying that some of the rumors that we've heard are not true. I'm saying even the news as it is reported, if not factually sound, is not the same thing as the truth.
Yeah.
There are people with different bits of information on all sides of this issue who know that some of the things we're seeing online are completely false and fabricated, yet it's generating more outrage. We know some things that may be going on at Wizards of the Coast that are even worse than what we're hearing, but nobody's hearing about it, so it doesn't make the outrage any more or less. And so the outrage machine can be useful, can be helpful, can make people aware of important things. It can also take on a life of its own and drive things into places where it makes things worse for everyone, not just for the people who we are being outraged against. And so I'm stepping outside of even like gaming here to the world as a whole. And all of those things are true. Yeah. Oh, Teos, please take me away from this place. What do you say?
So, I look at these kinds of things a lot in my day job because I come from the environmental side. And one of the things I really appreciated learning about when I was in graduate school was a thing that back then was called the issue attention cycle. And I think it's a very good term for it. There are other terms that are used today. But the idea is that when an issue comes up, you have a narrow window in which you can get anything done about it. And that's why outrage, even when it's misplaced and even when it's partial and not altogether accurate, can be very valuable because it suddenly creates a response to the situation. It calls for that. So on one hand, I love me some rage because it creates action. But as you said, that rage is never the full picture. And even, the interesting thing is, even if we were an employee at Wizards, we probably wouldn't have the full truth, right? Because we're not in all the meetings. So we don't know what, certain departments or groups or whatever, and that can so color things, right? There are entire projects around products where, you might hear a really hilarious story from one person or frightening story or whatever, use an adjective, a story around how this product was made and how something went wrong. And then you speak to someone else and you hear about how something went right on the same project from a totally different group and how that really saved the day. They're all the truth. And it's important to keep in mind that we are not hearing everything, that there are people fighting good fights and doing good arguments, just that there are problems. And like you said about this has come before. I think we are in a very unique time for a number of reasons. One is that social media is now primed to do this kind of outrage response. Unfortunately, even when it's not merited. Um, and so, in a case when it has a fair amount of merit, we're seeing just an incredible effect, right? I mean, this could not have happened 5 years ago. And that's both good and bad that this can go as far as it can. But it is not that dissimilar from things that have happened in the past, both things that nobody heard about and things that people had heard about.
Mhm.
In fact, I can draw any number of parallels between what we're hearing and what we heard during fourth edition. It's just that the way it played out in fourth edition was a little different, and our social
Mhm.
situation of living on forums and things like that was very different, and so it didn't have the same sort of impact. Um, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, and it's fascinating to think on that. It's a really good question. The other thing I would say about this question of what are we missing in the larger context is that a lot of people are focusing their rage on wizards, understandably, but a lot of the arguments being made around the open gaming license, you can try this trick at home. Take out the name Wizards and put in the name of your favorite publisher. And how do you feel about that, right?
Mhm.
So if you feel we don't need any
Right.
open gaming license to create for Dungeons and Dragons, say we don't need any open gaming license to create for Fantasy AGE. How does
Mhm.
that feel, right? Fantasy AG is a guy. I bring up that game as an example because Green Ronin has often said, like, if we don't get enough sales this month, I don't know that we can keep going, right? Like it's this close, right?
Mhm.
So what would it be like if suddenly people were like, you know what, let's just make more products than Green Ronin makes, and let's publish those, and let's assume that we have the right to do this, and so on. So a lot of these things, try putting in a different company name and see whether you still like what's being discussed.
Yep, I totally did that to the Eldritch Lorecast yesterday.
It-
Everyone was talking about how we could make these things and we don't need permission, and you can't copyright game mechanics, and right, you can't do this and you can't do that. And I'm like, all right, then let's say that we make a game and everyone loves it and it becomes very popular. And Wizard says, well, we'll just make it, we'll just make a clone of that game and put our $1 billion marketing behind it. How would we feel?
and you
So
don't even need a billion
we have to
dollar
take it all.
right. You don't need a billion
No.
dollar engine. Like many small games and many small companies, if even a couple of people were to create tons of content for that game and claim the right to do so, a great example is when
Mhm.
someone made a pocket version of a D&D, right? If someone were to make a pocket
Right.
version of your favorite non D&D role playing game and claim they had the right to do that, and it became hugely popular, more popular than the normal core book, it only takes a few number of sales actually to seriously impact these small companies that are probably not in the
Yep.
black anyway, right? They may not be financially
Right.
solvent to begin
Right.
with. So you throw something like that on there and
Yeah.
it could just be the end of our industry. So I that's one of the reasons why I love the OGL is the OGL is an excuse for us not to confront these hard issues to where we might
Mhm.
end up in a place none of us like. And we should be cautious about that. And a good trick, swap in your other favorite company name and see how that feels.
Yep. So thank you for that question. And we will move on to sort of a similar question uh, from Dan the DM via Mastodon. Uh, I'm about to start a new campaign in a week. The OGL makes me want to not play 5e out of principle. I don't use D&D Beyond, and I'm playing with all third-party content I already own. No Tasha's, Xanathar's, or even Monster Manual. Should I feel guilty here?
Mm.
How do I, as a responsible consumer, navigate this topic? Uh, Teos, I'm going to let you go first.
I mean, again, I look at things through the lens of my environmental field, and my best friends buy SUVs. They're still my friends. Like there are complicated issues, and the other thing is that so one is that you can't expect everything around you to be perfection. It's just not possible. It's not how humanity works. Um, Also, what you love about the game 2 weeks ago is still true today. Those things you love the things that those third party companies do for you. You love the things that D&D did for you and that Wizards of the Coast did for you. Those are all true things. And I separate in my mind the issue from the larger picture because, as we said before, this has happened before, right? There are people who hated fourth edition so much they never touched the game. There are people who hated any number of things that they'll never work with that company again, right? And then I've ended up working for that company, and I'm like, wow, that was a great experience. So it's so hard. Life is complex, right? And companies are complex. So I would try to focus on the issue at hand and play the game you want to play. You know, if this is the perfect time for you to try out another game and you want to do that, awesome. But if you would really want to be playing a D&D campaign, there's nothing wrong about that, right? If you want to buy a third-party product or even an official product, that's okay, right? Good people make those things. Those are good products. Those are fun. It is okay to do that, right? But if your conscience makes you feel otherwise, that's all right too, right? Like just go with your heart, and don't feel that you have to do a particular thing. More important is speaking up about the issue, the specific issue of what's happening, and trying to drive that specific change. What do you think, Shawn?
Very true. Yeah, well, I don't want to make all of this about me, but I've lost a lot of sleep in the last 2 weeks, and a lot of people are being affected by this. You know, I quit jobs, you know, like real life jobs, right, in the business world, doing business type things, serious things, to come make games, because I thought the open gaming license would be there to let me do what I need to do and let the companies I work for do the things they need to do. So I am very much affected by this. I give you my blessing to play D&D without feeling guilty. You don't have to feel guilty about it, right? Corporations are destroying the planet. They're fostering wealth inequality in ways that we couldn't even imagine 10 years ago. They're trampling on human rights all over the world. This is a company that's, you know, making maybe questionable choices about a game.
That's good perspective, Shawn.
Right. Enjoy your game if your group likes it. And Teos said, if you want to play something else, I always encourage people to try different games. If you love D&D and that's it, play D&D.
Yeah.
And finally, George PR via Mastodon. I'm listening to the spells issue, and I was wondering about more free-form spells. My group is all in with reflavoring spells, though I sometimes wish you had more mechanical changes, such as magic missile allowing you to choose your damage type, etc. How do you think build your own spell would affect the game? So, you know, it's a great question. It's a question of power. When you have things like resistances and immunities and vulnerabilities, those are baked into the core of the game. So if you change that ability to be able to do anything you want, you're changing that equation. But role-playing games like D&D trust the dungeon masters to do what's best for their games. So there's no reason there can't be spells. Think of thaumaturgy. Think of prestidigitation. These are sort of free-form spells. They give examples in the description of things it can do, but you as the DM can allow whatever you want.
Yeah.
We could see a version of D&D like that. The game master would probably need some guidelines. In your first level spell slot, the most damage that you can do is 2d6 to one creature or 1d6 to multiple creatures. For second level spells, the most damage you can do, if you add a condition on top of that, the damage die is reduced by 2, right? You could give those sorts of things and then allow free-form spells in that way. Or just allow anything that your imagination can do. I want to cast a spell that knocks everybody prone. So, boom, prone they go. And that's fine. Now you're going to fight the nostalgia crew who want their spells to do the things that their spells have always done. But you could totally do that in a game of D&D.
So this is a really cool question. I like it because, and I want to talk about a bit more in the spell section, because there are things like illusions where this really comes to mind, right? So I think there's two things. That there's how much of a spell should be ambiguous and defined between player and DM, And then there's the kind of idea of, can I change things up to fit a concept, right? And specifically, what was said here is sort of, can I change the type of damage that a magic missile does? And it gets tricky because what rules are trying to do is to make it so that things are clear and feel standard, and you can sort of hang your hat on them and know what to expect. And if you can always change the type of damage that you do, then that is an advantage that the spell is not. It would need to be taken account into the spell level, right? If fireball could be other types of damage, then that can be advantageous, and maybe it should be more powerful. But it's ultimately up to you, right, and how you decide to do it. And I'd say there are a couple of spectrums. Like in third edition, I played a character where I explained that everything I did, all the spells that I cast, were through artifacts that I had managed to get my hands on. And whenever I played an adventure in organized play, I would write down the things that I found, and those would become new spells, right? And what I would say to players before we began, when sort of character introduction time, I would sort of out of character say, it's up to you whether my character is mentally making this up, right? Like, they are not in a stable place, and this is how they see the world, but that they're just casting spells normally, or whether your character, you the player, believe that I actually have all these artifacts and do these things, because it's not in the rules, right? The rules don't allow me to do that, to just take artifacts and cast off of them. But that's my character concept. You can choose which reality it is for you. And so I gave people that flexibility. So there's no real problem, right? And that's one thing you can do, is to give people that flexibility of, you think that you're coloring your spells, but are you, right? Subjective. And you're not intruding on anyone's game space, or demanding something out of them. And then there's that extra step where you really are saying, like, and therefore I can do, cold or acid damage with this spell. That requires the table to be okay with that, right? The DM especially, but the other players as well, because it becomes an advantage, right? Can the person who's attacking with a hammer decide to make it piercing by, hitting with the sharp edge or the pointed edge on the top of the hammer? It just, so you have to think through that. And as long as your group's happy with it, then there's no problem at all.
Absolutely. And we'll talk more about spells a little bit later. But let's get into our news and commentary. So, the OGL Elephant in the Room, Part 3. A lot has happened. A lot will continue to happen. 20 minutes after the show drops, even more will happen. I've pretty much said everything that I can earlier about this.
Well, Shawn, maybe I'll try to just, at the high level, right? I think what we've seen in the past week since we last recorded is this issue has exploded, right? It's not only important to people in our immediate hobby, it has, and not just across the RPG space, but people just who are interested in gaming in general, in gaming companies, right? People who cover Magic the Gathering but never talk about D&D suddenly are streaming to their, hundreds of thousands of followers about this issue, and not making just one video, but 2 or 3. We're seeing that there is an engine of interest out there. YouTube is picking these things up and promoting them. And so you have lawyers who are chiming in. You have all kinds of folks. You have people who haven't been in the hobby focus in ages who are coming out of the woodwork. You have people who've done bad things who are trying to redeem themselves by talking about evil Wizards of the Coast, or companies that are really happy that no one's thinking about the reason why someone tried to start a union at their company anymore, because suddenly they are forming alliances with other companies and coming to save the industry, and so much in between. And there have been a lot of really surprising, for this type of issue, really surprising moves by companies to say, we are no longer creating content for D&D. We're going to go in our own direction, right? And some of those are things that were already planned. So MCDM, for example, have been for more than a year talking about how they want to make their own game. This has been the impetus for them to make that change. Makes a lot of sense. But there are other companies that really seems like just overnight, they're like, I'm going to pull all my back catalog, which there's no reason to do, or I'm moving away from this. And so that is really unanticipated, really unprecedented at this volume. And we've seen everyday outlets carry this, right? Forbes, We've seen the Electronic Frontier Foundation. We've seen CNBC, Financial Times, right? So this issue really has become so big, and in particular, the popularization late last week of the idea of canceling your D&D Beyond subscription has created a real financial angle to this, and that is I think going to be a deep blow to Wizards of the Coast that they need to take careful consideration of, because D&D Beyond is their platform, right? It's linked to everything else they want to do in the future, and so if that's hurt, every canceled subscription is not just a blow today, but a blow for the future. It calls into question what impact this may have on the movie. I would probably say close to none, but it's not great. It's certainly not great that if someone out there goes and does a search for D&D thinking they're going to find the movie, that they might come up with this stuff, right? That's not good, because the game is not just or let's say the plan is not just around a movie, but the overall larger strategy. And so you don't want to have negatives and positives colliding like that in at such a high level. So, Wizards is going to do something. And they said that on their blog that they put out on Friday the 13th. But what it's not clear. They've mentioned a few things that they're backing off on, but those aren't the only critical issues. There are a lot of critical issues. And so I think a lot is going to hang on what Wizards does to respond to those points and where we go from there. But the industry doesn't seem to be sitting around waiting for that response.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, business works at a very slow pace, and social media and outrage works at a very quick pace.
Yeah.
And those two things rarely mesh well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So we are seeing.
Yeah, Shawn, your points are really. This is maybe another thing in that sort of what is something that we don't kind of think about enough, is that a lot of people have been saying, how is Wizards not responding? It's hard. I mean, in my business life, whenever there've been emergencies, you are lucky to get the people in the room within 3 days span, let alone make a decision around that. It seems like, well, this should be priority one, but it's really hard to get all the people who need to sign off on an issue in a room and even properly understand it, because I think the extent of this reaction proves how Wizards didn't expect this, right? They would never have gone forward with it had they understood that this was going to happen. So they miscalculated tremendously, and that means you have to go back and re-examine everything. Hopefully that's what they're doing, is re-examining everything. That can't be done in a week's time at most companies. It can't be done in a month in most companies. I'm sure they'll try to accelerate, to do it as quickly as possible. But these things take time, and it's not surprising that Wizards needs, days and weeks to formulate a response.
Yeah. And as we have talked about over the last even year or more, right, all of this stuff is happening because Hasbro needed a new direction. Their investors were clamoring for a new direction.
Yeah.
And this new direction is Wizards of the Coast is going to lead us into the future, and D&D is going to become a $1 billion brand.
Yeah.
And this is the inevitable outcome of that plan being put into place maybe too quickly, and people panicking within Hasbro and Wizards to try to get to that point. And we're seeing a fallout from that, where people who don't necessarily understand the industry are making decisions a little bit drastically without. How much better would this have gone if, instead of putting out an open gaming license on a piece of paper to whoever they sent it to, right? Probably these 20 companies that were making money enough to get royalties, instead of just putting out a piece of paper and saying, here is what this open gaming license would look like, to actually set up meetings with each of them without putting things on paper and saying, tell us about your business. We want to partner with you, instead of doing it the way that they did.
Yeah.
You can't leak open and honest discussion. You
Great
can
point.
leak a piece of paper, with that written on it. So, that is the ultimate misstep that we see these larger businesses pushing for profit, which is fine. Everybody, wants to push for profit,
Yeah.
but without really understanding the consequences of what they're trying, or even trying to understand the people on the other side of the issue.
Yeah.
But it's also important to say that a month from now, or sorry, a month ago, Hasbro stock was at $55 a share, give or take. What's it at right now? $65 a share.
Mhm.
So all of this outrage, all of this attention that's being drawn to Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro has ended up with about a, I don't know, 5-6% increase in their stock price.
And I would say that what
That
that's
should also be telling.
yeah, I mean, to me, it says that there has been no impact on it, right? And because I think Hasbro stock has been quite low, and so it's probably recovering from that low period, especially as a movie looms. But investors are not seeing this yet, right? And if they see it,
Mhm.
it's not clear whether they'll understand it. Because I don't think anyone
Right.
is out there at their level saying, "Hey, here's what that means with the D&D Beyond subscriptions," right? That's not
Right.
in that kind of level. But it may be an impact. We'll have to see.
Well, that's what I'm waiting to see if it
Yeah.
does uh, have any impact. So
and
yeah,
and we
it's
have your point is a great one that the D&D has historically managed to sort of magically elude these kinds of problems while being like every time that Hasbro has said or Wizards has said, "Hey D&D, we want you to get bigger." It's never been so hard that it's been problematic other than probably the start of 4E. But it has managed to sort of dodge that bullet and be just enough outside of the limelight to avoid that. But we saw, and we've been reporting on this, how its profitability and its increasing revenue finally put it so squarely in the spotlight that it isn't just mentioned on financial calls about Hasbro. It is now one of the focus areas. And that's exceedingly dangerous because there's no proof that D&D can grow tremendously, right? There is the concept, and I mean, if I worked there, I would love to explore that concept, but it is not a proven thing. And so it's just this potential. And they're trying to move on that potential, hopefully to the benefit of everybody, but they've done so with an enormous blunder to begin with, right? So we have a lot of links in the show notes where you can catch up on all of the different stories. We're not going to go through them right now, but if you've missed any of these pieces, you'll find that in our show notes if you're a member of our Patreon. Um, and there's some great articles, some wonderful write-ups. Comicbook.com has an excellent one on the community impact and changes. Penny Arcade has just a gorgeous write-up on things, and a amazing cartoon where they bite into Nathan Stewart's arm. Just, so there are some great
Yep.
pieces there, but we cannot cover everything. And I think we can probably, our next two news items you'll find also in our show notes. MCDM is going to be ending Arcadia and moving on to change the focus of the Patreon will be setting content and will be eventually towards their new RPG. Kobold Press is creating a new RPG, and a number of kind of news items like that that are very interesting.
Yep. Now, this would normally be like our top story, what's coming next, but with everything that's going on, it gets pushed down the list. Uh, they've given us more information on the D&D TV show that's being made. It will be on Paramount Plus. 8 episodes have been ordered. The series is being written and produced by Rawson Marshall Thurber, who wrote and directed the action comedy Red Notice, which was the most watched Netflix film of all time to this point. And if you remember or enjoy the film Dodgeball, that is a production of Rawson Marshall Thurber. So it Thurber will write and direct the first episode, and they've said that the movie and this show will be in the same universe. So whether that means it's all in the Forgotten Realms or it's all in the same iteration of the Forgotten Realms, uh,
Mm.
we'll see. But this, like, 4 years ago, if we had read this, we would be like, "Oh my gosh, this is the greatest thing ever!" And let's
Yeah.
let's discuss this. And obviously, for fans, of D&D, the brand and the culture,
Yeah.
it's getting a bit pushed down the chain.
And again, as much as it leaves a bad taste in our mouth now, I mean, I don't want to forget that these are things that bring us enjoyment, right? And so let's
Mhm.
try as much as we can to separate in our mind the outrage of what Wizards of the Coast has done from the fact that, boy, wouldn't it be cool to have a good D&D TV show, right? So hopefully the one can be resolved so we can fully enjoy the movie that's coming up and these things and the toys and you name it, right? Because D&D is
Yeah.
super fun as a game.
Hopefully in happier times we can discuss what should be in a D&D TV show, and
Mhm.
when it comes out we can discuss what was in the D&D TV show. So speaking of TV shows, tell us about the Legend of Zelda cartoon.
This is a fun article. Polygon looked into the 1986 cartoon Legend of Zelda, based on a computer game, and it interviewed people involved in the creation of it. And one of the neatest things was the idea or not the idea that this accounting of how Eve Forward, who ended up being one of the writers, was 16 or 17 at the time, and she was asked to contribute by her family, and she didn't know Zelda all that well, but she was playing Dungeons and Dragons and running a campaign, so she drew elements from D&D itself into her stories and from her own campaign. So the stories would be kind of things that they were doing and had done in their game. There are things like a mirror of opposition, where your negative character appears and fights you. Like that came out of D&D and was used in a show. So it's just a fun read about how amazing to be 16 or 17 and have your parents get you into writing a TV show and you just draw from your D&D campaigns. Dream come true, right?
Yeah, that's great. And then Roll20 has listed the top 12 best-selling RPGs of 2020. So this is a Geek Native article taking the again, right, the role-playing games that were sold via virtual tabletop platform and marketplace
Mhm.
of Roll20. Teos, tell us what these top 12 spots look like.
I mean, shocker. You at home can play along and guess how many of the top 12 were Wizards of the Coast products. The answer is seven. And the top seven are all Wizards of the Coast except for one of them, which is Cyberpunk Red at number 5, right? So that's the impact of that. Also on the list are Call of Cthulhu Starter Set, Kingmaker Adventure Path, Pathfinder Mega Bundle, and Call of Cthulhu Keeper Bundle. So you've got, Cyberpunk, 2 Chaosium products, and 2 Paizo products, and the rest is all Wizards. So it just shows how vital Wizards is to the platform, even if half the people are playing D&D. The top sales are clearly heavily towards D&D. So I thought that was really just fascinating, and it's again just important context when everybody goes like, well, let's just abandon that. Well, there's a lot of money that rides on it, right? And as well as a lot of enjoyment.